The history of Portugal dates back to the early Middle Ages. In the 15th and 16th centuries, it ascended to the status of a world power during Europe's Age of Discovery, as it built up a vast empire, including possessions in South America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Over the following 2 centuries, Portugal kept most of its colonies, but gradually lost much of its wealth and status as the Dutch, English, and French took an increasing share of the spice and slave trades by surrounding or conquering the widely scattered Portuguese trading posts and territories. Signs of military decline began with 2 disastrous battles. The Battle of Alcácer in Morocco in 1578 and Spain's abortive attempt to conquer England in 1588 by means of the Spanish Armada. Portugal was then in a dynastic union with Spain and contributed ships to the Spanish invasion fleet. The country was further weakened by the destruction of much of its capital city in an earthquake in 1755, occupation during the Napoleonic Wars, and the loss of its largest colony, Brazil, in 1822. From the middle of the 19th century to the late 1950s, nearly 2 million Portuguese left Portugal to live in Brazil and the United States. In 1910, there was a revolution that deposed the monarchy. Amid corruption, repression of the church, and the near-bankruptcy of the state, a military coup in 1926 installed a dictatorship that remained until another coup in 1974. The new government instituted sweeping democratic reforms and granted independence to all of Portugal's African colonies in 1975. Portugal is a founding member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the European Free Trade Association. It entered the European Community in 1986. Etymology. The word Portugal derives from the Roman Celtic place name Portus Cale. Cale was the name of an early settlement located at the mouth of the Douro River, which flows into the Atlantic Ocean in the north of what is now Portugal. Around 200 BC, the Romans took the Iberian Peninsula from the Carthaginians during the Second Punic War, and in the process conquered Cale and renamed it Portus Cale. During the Dark Ages, the region around Portus Cale became known by the Suebian Visigoths as Portugal. The name Portugal evolved into Portugal during the 7th and 8th centuries, and by the 9th century, that term was used extensively to refer to the region between the rivers Douro and Minho, the Minho flowing along what would become the northern Portugal-Spain border. By the 11th and 12th century, Portugal was already referred to as Portugal. The etymology of the name Cale is somewhat mysterious, as is the identity of the town's founders. The most plausible origin points to Cale as a Celtic name, like many others found in the region. The word Cale or Cala meant port, inlay, or harbour, and implied the existence of an older Celtic harbour. This sounds like a plausible origin, as for instance the Gaelic word for harbour is indeed Cala. Others argue it is the stem of Galatia. Another theory claims it derives from the word Caledunum. In any case, the particle portu in the word Portugal was used as the basis of Porto, the modern name for the city located on the site of the ancient city of Cale at the mouth of the Douro River, and Port became the name in English of the wine from the Douro Valley region around Porto. The name Cale is today reflected in Gaia, a city on the left bank of the river. Early history. Prehistory. The region of present-day Portugal was inhabited by Neanderthals, and then by Homo sapiens, who roamed the northern Iberian Peninsula. Neanderthals probably arrived 100,000 years BP. A Neanderthal tooth found at Nova da Columbiera cave in Estremadura is one of the oldest human fossils so far discovered. Homo sapiens arrived in Portugal in around 35,000 years ago and spread rapidly throughout the country. Pre-Celtic tribes inhabited Portugal, leaving a remarkable cultural footprint. The Sinetists developed a written language, leaving stelae mainly found in the south of Portugal. Early in the first millennium BC, Several waves of Celts invaded Portugal from Central Europe and intermarried with the local populations to form several different ethnic groups, with many tribes. The Celtic presence in Portugal is traceable in broad outline, through archaeological and linguistic evidence. They dominated much of northern and central Portugal, but in the south they were unable to establish their stronghold, which retained its non-Indo-European character until the Roman conquest. In southern Portugal, some small, semi-permanent commercial coastal settlements were also founded by Phoenician Carthaginians. Ancient history archaeological artifact from the work developed in the area of Citania de Briteros. Cross or Cruzado in Citania de Briteros. Informative plaque of the proto-historic settlement of Citania de Briteros. Another artifact from Citania de Briteros. A Pedra Formosa. Numerous pre-Roman peoples of the Iberian Peninsula inhabited the territory when a Roman invasion occurred in the 3rd century BC. The Romanization of Hispania took several centuries. The Roman provinces that covered present-day Portugal were Lusitania in the south and Galicia in the north. Numerous Roman sites are scattered around present-day Portugal. Some of the urban remains are quite large, such as Conambriga and Mirobriga. Several works of engineering, such as baths, temples, bridges, roads, circuses, theatres, and laymen's homes are preserved throughout the country. Coins, sarcophagi, and ceramics are also numerous. Following the fall of Rome, the kingdom of the Suebi and the Visigothic kingdom controlled the territory between the 5th and 7th centuries. Romanization. Romanization began with the arrival of the Roman army in the Iberian Peninsula in 218 BC during the Second Punic War against Carthage. The Romans sought to conquer Lusitania, a territory south of the Douro River and Spanish Extremadura, with its capital at Emerita Augusta. Mining was the primary factor that made the Romans interested in conquering the region. One of Rome's strategic objectives was to cut off Carthaginian access to the Iberian copper, tin, gold, and silver mines. The Romans intensely exploited the Aljustrel and Santo Domingo mines in the Iberian Pyrite Belt, which extends to Seville, while the south of what is now Portugal was relatively easily occupied by the Romans. The conquest of the north was achieved only with difficulty due to resistance from Serra da Estrela by Celts and Lusitanians led by Viriatus, who managed to resist Roman expansion for years. Viriatus, a shepherd from Serra da Estrela who was expert in guerrilla tactics, waged relentless war against the Romans, defeating several successive Roman generals, until he was assassinated in 140 BC by traitors bought by the Romans. Viriatus has long been hailed as the first truly heroic figure in Proto-Portuguese history. However, those living in more settled Romanized parts of southern Portugal and Lusitania would have begged to differ, as he would often raid these regions, victimizing the inhabitants. The conquest of the Iberian Peninsula was complete 2 centuries after the Romans' arrival, when they defeated the remaining Cantabre, Astures and Gallici in the Cantabrian Wars in the time of Emperor Augustus. In 74 CE Vespasian granted Latin rights to most municipalities of Lusitania. In 212 CE, the Constitutia Antoniniana gave Roman citizenship to all free subjects of the empire, and, at the end of the century, the Emperor Diocletian founded the province of Galicia, which included modern-day northern Portugal. As well as mining, the Romans also developed agriculture, on some of the best agricultural land in the empire. In what is now Alentejo, vines and cereals were cultivated, and fishing was intensively pursued in the coastal belt of the Algarve, Povoa de Varzim, Matosinhos, Troia and the coast of Lisbon, for the manufacture of garum that was exported by Roman trade routes to the entire empire. Business transactions were facilitated by coinage and the construction of an extensive road network, bridges and aqueducts. such as Trajan's bridge in Aquiflavia. Roman rule brought geographical mobility to the inhabitants of Portugal, and increased their interaction with the rest of the world as well as internally. Soldiers often served in different regions and eventually settled far from their birthplace, while the development of mining attracted migration into the mining areas. The Romans founded numerous cities, such as Olisipo, Bracara Augusta, Eminium, and Pax Julia, and left important cultural legacies in what is now Portugal. Vulgar Latin became the dominant language of the region, and Christianity spread throughout Lusitania from the 3rd century. Germanic invasions. In 409, with the decline of the Roman Empire, the Iberian Peninsula was occupied by Germanic tribes that the Romans referred to as barbarians. In 411, with a federation contract with Emperor Honorius, many of these people settled in Hispania. An important group was made up of the Suebian Vandals in Gallaecia, who founded a Suebi kingdom with its capital in Braga. They came to dominate Eminium as well, and there were Visigoths to the south. The Suebi and the Visigoths were the Germanic tribes who had the most lasting presence in the territories corresponding to modern Portugal. As elsewhere in Western Europe, there was a sharp decline in urban life during the Dark Ages. Roman institutions disappeared in the wake of the Germanic invasions with the exception of ecclesiastical organizations, which were fostered by the Suebi in the 5th century and adopted by the Visigoths afterwards. Although the Suebi and Visigoths were initially followers of Arianism and Priscillianism, they adopted Catholicism from the local inhabitants. Saint Martin of Braga was a particularly influential evangelist at this time. In 429, the Visigoths moved south to expel the Alans and Vandals and founded a kingdom with its capital in Toledo. From 470, conflict between the Suebi and Visigoths increased. In 585, the Visigothic king Liudgild conquered Braga and annexed Gallaecia. From that time, the Iberian Peninsula was unified under a Visigothic kingdom. With the Visigoths settled in the newly formed kingdom, a new class emerged that had been unknown in Roman times. A nobility, which played a tremendous social and political role during the Middle Ages. It was also under the Visigoths that the Church began to play a very important part within the state. Since the Visigoths did not learn Latin from the local people, they had to rely on Catholic bishops to continue the Roman system of governance. The laws established during the Visigothic monarchy were thus made by councils of bishops, and the clergy started to emerge as a high-ranking class. Islamic rule in the Reconquista, Umayyad conquest of Hispania during the caliphate of the Umayyad Caliph Al-Walid I. The Berber commander Tariq ibn Ziyad led a small force that landed at Gibraltar on April 30, 711, ostensibly to intervene in a Visigothic civil war. After a decisive victory over King Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete on July 19, 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad, joined by Arab governor Musa ibn Nasser of Ifriqiya, brought most of the Visigothic kingdom under Muslim occupation in a 7-year campaign. The Visigothic resistance to this invasion was ineffective, though it needed siege to sack a couple of cities. The main reason the cities were overwhelmed so easily is not easily explained, since the only surviving sources were Muslims whose accounts were anecdotal. The Visigothic territories included what is today Spain, Portugal, Andorra, Gibraltar, and the southwestern part of France, anciently known as Septimania. The invading Moors wanted to conquer and convert Europe to Islam, so they crossed the Pyrenees to use Visigothic Septimania as a base of operations. The advance into Western Europe was only stopped in what is now north-central France by the West Germanic Franks under Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in 732. In what is now Portugal, they went on to rule for up to 4 centuries. Muslims called their conquests in Iberia, Al-Andalus, and in what was to become Portugal. They mainly consisted of the old Roman province of Lusitania, while Gallaecia was more or less abandoned to the remaining unsubdued Christians. Until the Berber revolt in the 730s, Al-Andalus was treated as a dependency of Umayyad North Africa. Subsequently, links were strained until the caliphate was overthrown in the late 740s. The invading medieval Muslim Moors who conquered and destroyed the Christian Visigothic kingdom in the Iberian Peninsula were mainly Berbers from North Africa, but they were joined by Arabs from the Middle East. The North African Berbers had been conquered and converted to Islam by Arabs from the Middle East in the 7th century during the Muslim conquest of the Maghreb, the area of North Africa west of Egypt and north of the Sahara Desert mainly inhabited by Berber peoples. Beginning of the Reconquista in 718 AD, a Visigothic noble named Pelagius was elected leader by many of the ousted Visigoth nobles. Pelagius called for the remnant of the Christian Visigothic armies to rebel against the Moors and regroup in the unconquered northern Asturian highlands, better known today as the Cantabrian Mountains, a small mountain region in modern northwestern Spain adjacent to the Bay of Biscay. He planned to use the Cantabrian mountain range as a place of refuge and protection from the invaders and as a springboard to reconquer lands from the Moors. After defeating the Moors in the Battle of Covadonga in 722 AD, Pelagius was proclaimed king, founding the Christian kingdom of Asturias and starting the War of Reconquest known in Portuguese as the Reconquista, creation of the county of Portugal at the end of the 9th century. The region of Portugal between the Minho River and Douro River was reconquered from the Moors by Vimara Perez on the orders of King Alfonso III of Asturias. Finding that the region had two major cities, Portiscale on the coast and Braga in the interior, with many towns deserted due to the Moorish invasion, he decided to repopulate them with Christians that resisted conversion as Mozarabs. Vimara Perez did not experience great difficulty in reorganizing the region and elevating it to the status of a county. One of the first cities Vimara Perez founded was Vimaranense, known today as Guimarães, the birthplace of the Portuguese nationality, or the cradle city. After annexing the county of Portugal into one of the several counties that made up the Kingdom of Asturias, King Alfonso III named Vimara Perez as the first count. The region became known simultaneously as Portugal, Portugal, and Portugalia, the county of Portugal. The Kingdom of Asturias was later divided as a result of dynastic disputes. The northern region of Portugal became part of the Kingdom of Galicia and, later part of the Kingdom of Leon. Subi Visigothic arts and architecture, in particular sculpture, had shown a natural continuity with the Roman period. With the Reconquista, new artistic trends took hold, with Galician Asturian influences more visible than the Leonese. The Portuguese group was characterized by a general return to classicism. The county courts of Viseu and Coimbra played a very important role in this process. Mozarabic architecture was found in the south, in Lisbon and beyond, while in the Christian realms Galician, Portuguese and Asturian architecture prevailed. As a vassal of the Kingdom of Leon, Portugal occasionally gained de facto independence during weak Leonese reigns. Portugal appeared as a kingdom in 1065 under the rule of Garcia II of Galicia. Because of feudal power struggles, Portuguese and Galician nobles rebelled. Garcia's forces defeated those under Nuno II Mendes, the last Count of Portugal of the House of Vimara Perez, at the Battle of Pedroso on 18 February 1071. The battle resulted in Nuno Mendes' death and the declaration of Garcia II as King of Portugal, the first person to claim this title. In 1072, the country rejoined Leon under Garcia I's brother Alfonso VI of Leon. In 1095, Portugal broke away from the Kingdom of Galicia. Its territories, consisting largely of mountains, moorland and forests, were bounded on the north by the Minho, and on the south by the Mondego River. Foundation of the Kingdom of Portugal at the end of the 11th century. The Burgundian knight Henry became Count of Portugal and defended its independence by merging the County of Portugal and the County of Coimbra. His efforts were assisted by a civil war that raged between Leon and Castile and distracted his enemies. Henry's son Afonso Henriques took control of the county upon his death. The city of Braga, the unofficial Catholic center of the Iberian Peninsula, faced new competition from other regions. Lords of the cities of Coimbra and Porto fought with Braga's clergy and demanded the independence of the reconstituted county. Portugal traces its national origin to the 24th of June 1128 with the Battle of São Mamadé. Afonso proclaimed himself Prince of Portugal, and in 1139, King of Portugal. In 1143, the Kingdom of Leon recognizes him as King of Portugal by the Treaty of Zamora. In 1179, the papal bull Manifestus Probatum of Pope Alexander III officially recognized Afonso I as king. After the Battle of São Mamadé, the first capital of Portugal was Guimarães, from which the first king ruled. Later, when Portugal was already officially independent, he ruled from Coimbra. Affirmation of Portugal. The Algarve, the southernmost region of Portugal, was finally conquered from the Moors in 1249, and in 1255 the capital shifted to Lisbon. Neighboring Spain would not complete its reconquista until 1492, almost 250 years later. Portugal's land boundaries have been notably stable for the rest of the country's history. The border with Spain has remained almost unchanged since the 13th century. The Treaty of Windsor created an alliance between Portugal and England that remains in effect to this day. Since early times, fishing and overseas commerce have been the main economic activities. Henry the Navigator's interest in exploration, together with some technological developments in navigation, made Portugal's overseas expansion possible and led to great advances in geographic, mathematical, scientific knowledge and naval technology.